This is a story that appeared in March-April fantasy and science fiction, and it's called Waiting for the Phone to Ring. Within this novelette, there is a story, and I will read that story and the material that is around it. On a morning last October, I was reminded of the Velvet Underground song, New Age, in the live version, the one where Lou Reed sings about getting a funny call today. It came before 10 a.m., early by my standards. Since I've retired, I sleep late. Marty Simonson said hello and asked how I was. My friendship with Marty goes back to college. He's a director now, for the stage mostly. Marty has, of course, an instinct for dramatic tease. An old friend of yours was talking about you last night, he told me. She's known you almost as long as I have. Then, a slight pause while I tried to imagine what he was talking about, and he said, Judy Finch says hello. And that was a surprise. It was long ago, and very briefly, that I'd thought of Judy Finch as a friend. We hadn't spoken since about the time she became the girl in the menage at the center of that legendary early 70s catastrophe, the Lord of Light. I'd seen her since, of course, like anybody might, in the famous scene in the Scorsese film where she shoots De Niro, as Pirate Jenny when they did Threepenny Opera at Lincoln Center. And there was the period when she took the name Judy Icon, hipper than Madonna, more famous than Patti Smith. She did stage shows, collages of memory and songs, all improvisational, never done the same way twice. But it was in the East Village in the late, great 1960s that I'd actually known Judy Finch. Her father was a well-known sculptor, her mother was a critic. She was 19, studying theater and hanging around Max's Kansas City. My earliest memory of her was one afternoon when I was on a front stoop on St. Mark's Place with my close friend Joan Martin. This girl with long blonde hair walked by and said hello to Joan. Looking at Judy as we got introduced, I first saw a nice schoolgirl, then a tough city kid, and then a young woman with a tinge of tragedy. She sat, talked with us for a while. When she left, Joan told me the legend of Judy Finch and Ray Light. A few years before, when Judy was 15, her boyfriend had been snatched off the street by private detectives who made a living returning runaways to the families that wanted to destroy them. They'd been apart ever since, but she loved him still. 45 years later, I asked Marty, what's she doing these days, and how the hell are you and she so intimate? She's writing, composing, doing what we all do later in life, trying to make it all make sense. She's got a stage work in mind, and I'm helping her shape it. We wondered if you were free for lunch today. This promised to be kind of interesting. Then Marty made it more so by adding, I told Judy about a piece you wrote a while back. She showed it to me just after Philip Marcy died, and that whole scene exploded. You know the one. Do you still have it? I told him I thought so. Could you bring it along? She was intrigued when I described it, and I think this may be material she can use. This was one of those mornings, maybe you've had them, when pressing dental bills meant that a couple of $1,000s would not have gone amiss. I agreed to meet them at noon at a taxi stand over in the Bowery. Took a little searching, but the piece Marty had mentioned was in a storage box in my closet. Down among the scribbled rejection notes from long-forgotten editors, the abandoned projects, old notebooks full of catty commentary, aborted plays and novel ideas, sketches for board games I'd once designed, letters from old lovers. I found it. Typewritten on cheap yellow paper, it was an artifact from the early 1970s, with attitude and run-on sentences to spare. In part, it was personal memory, and in part, an insight I'd gotten directly from the mind of Judy Finch's old flame, Ray Light. I sat on the stool in my kitchen and read the first couple of pages, remembered how I'd taken my own experiences and woven them into Ray's insight about what had happened to him a year or two before it happened to me. The kid with the sun in his eyes. The kid hasn't even been given that name yet as he stands on the corner of East 4th Street in the Bowery, tries to blink away the late afternoon light because he's not used to it, because his eyes are a bit pinned. Just a couple of weeks before, the kid rode from Ohio to the city in several cars and a couple of trucks, always with lone drivers, guys who sometimes just wanted to talk about themselves and their families, and all he had to do was be there. Other times, along the way, things got done with his body, and for that, he managed not to be present, to take a mental walk and to come back to himself when everything was over. And he and the driver were once more rolling towards New York. That ability to go away was the thing about the kid, even more than his hair and his clothes, that his parents wanted to cut off him. In the city, the kid hit Times Square, and it was bright and confusing and scary. And then some guy took him downtown to the East Village, which is poor and run down, but easier to figure out. And the cops were mean, but not so thick on the ground as uptown. And other runaways warned him about where not to go, and who in the neighborhood got rewards or kicks by turning in underage kids like him. So the kid, 16 years old, stands on the corner, leaning on a brick wall, with one leg up behind him in classic pose, and this mad boy who's taken the name Rambo is there with him, talking, making flowery gestures, saying, another place, another dimension or something, is where this stud thinks he's going, man. That he thought I was the one who was going to take him there is what's so fucking funny and freaky. Like he's a cult leader, but somehow he's trying to learn from me. The kid was coming to understand that it's drugs and hustling that keeps boys like him and Rambo alive and in contact with this world. And he feels still in control of all that. Because he had a kind of skill sometimes with a Mark or a John to know what they knew, as they know it, and without them being able to tell, he's hip to them. But with all that, he finds himself this afternoon out on the block early because he slipped over some line and woke up just after noon with a nasty need. Rambo said, the stud is important in art stuff. He owns a gallery or something. He told me he could get me a job, and he wants to see me tonight, but like he's the most weirded out trick I've ever turned. One minute he's telling me to read his mind, and the next he's trying to push me out a window and fly. When Rambo finished talking, the two of them pulled their money, split a $5 bag of junk to hold themselves over until the night. Just as they're about to set out for East 7th Street, where they'll score, Rambo nudges the kid and said, there he is. And the kid sees the outline of a figure, a guy crossing the street, silhouetted against the October sun, streaming down the long blocks. Then it was getting late, and I skimmed the rest of the story. Thinking about it as I brushed my teeth and showered, I understood how it had never sold, and how it would be of great interest to Judy if the project was what I suspected it was going to be. Walking east on Bleecker, stopping at a copy shop to get some clear reproductions of my fading pages, I thought about Judy on stage at the Fillmore, singing with the group Lord of Light. The Fillmore East in '71 was in the last months of its brief and glittery career. Rock groups were playing in sports arenas by then. The neighborhood was going very bad. Heading the bill that night was a frazzled hippie band whose last hit had been a year or two before. The canny old bluesman had second billing, with Lord of Light as the opening act. Little Judy Finch was Judy Light now. Her abducted boyfriend had returned, and Ray Light was his name. The dark crown was in the street waiting to be picked up, and he was one of the contenders. Rumors of suicide and intricate kink washed around the band. But the Fillmore audience was tough. It took more than that to impress us. Joplin and Hendrix and Morrison had come and gone, and left us with exaggerated memories of their performances here. Everyone in the group I was with was ripped out of his or her head. The Fillmore was maybe 2/3 full. Then the psychedelic amoebas of the Joshua Light Show filled the back screen. The drummer and bassist laid down the beat. The group was on stage. Ray Light wore black from the neck on down. Judy had a blonde crew cut. The guy called BT wore long white robes. Our world was all afire with Lord of Light stories. Ray, Judy, and BT were almost openly an off-stage three-way. It didn't come across on stage. Ray and Judy came together to harmonize and stepped apart. BT moved around the stage like a zombie while banging a tambourine. Ray Light's father paid money to have his son forcibly brought home, then had the boy hospitalized and given shock treatment. It was said the doctor who treated Ray had killed himself while Ray was in the hospital. His father had committed suicide not long after Ray's release. Revelation in 1,000 volts, Ray Light sang, blowing you to heaven, said Judy. The essential thing with the cult legend, as opposed to a popular star, is that in an audience of 2,000 people, the star touches most of them, but the cult legend can touch maybe 100. In Ray's case, it might not even have been that many, but the touch, I can testify, was searing. Those in the audience who were like me got caught in Ray Light's memory, passed with him through iron doors that were locked behind them, went down institutional hallways to a place where they were strapped to a table and had their brains blasted with electricity. When the song was over and I glanced around, I saw an audience just mildly grooving, but I noticed a couple of others besides me who looked more than a little disturbed.